and she has a few words before we start. Mary?
Good morning, everyone. I got a little moment to say some thank yous, and I'm very appreciative of that. And I'd like to thank the Point Lobos Foundation for asking me to do something that I love doing, interpreting the Point Lobos State Natural Reserve, especially the Weston Beach tide pools. It's been really lots of fun. I'd also like to thank Melissa Gobel, the State Parks docent coordinator, and Marie Murphy for originally launching me off into my career interpreting the tide pools by helping me make a pamphlet that I proposed making, the Weston Beach Tide Pool brochure. I'd also like to thank Karen Wagner, a current Point Lobos docent, who has made the Weston Beach Tide Pools her special place and who worked to help keeping that pamphlet in production. So lots of thanks to her. And I'd like to thank all the docents who are present here today. I'm not going to say any names because there's too many to say, but I will say one, and especially to Betty Maurutto, who took the shawl of being the administrator and our leader. And we appreciate her work to make our docent group organized and thriving with a positive spirit. So thank you, Betty. I'd like to thank the Point Lobos Foundation staff, board members, especially you members, because all of your contributions help California State Parks and the Point Lobos Docent Corps to interpret Point Lobos State Natural Reserve. Some examples through the Mint Van, easy access, our scopes and binoculars, helping to create new trails, especially like, for example, the Lace Lichen Trail, and then maintaining the trails. Much thanks and appreciation to all of the PLF people here. And lastly, I'd like to thank, I hope she's on already, but Vicki Pierce for a lifetime of advocating for the intertidal areas of the Monterey Bay Sanctuary, including Point Lobos State Natural Reserve. And those are my thank yous. So thank you for that time, Tracy.
Thank you all for being here. I am, like I said, so excited. I want to remind everyone, please, during the video portion, I found it works a little bit better if you not only mute, of course, mute, but also if you turn off, stop your video, so that, because it is an actual video that I'm sharing. And that's a 20 minutes, and enjoy the tide pools of Point Lobos.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mary Conway, and I'm sitting here at Weston Beach in Point Lobos State Natural Reserve. To begin with, as before we start to go look and explore at the tide pools, I'd like to just do the beginning line to Cannery Row of John Steinbeck. And I think many of us know this, but Cannery Row in Monterey in California is a poem, a stink, a grating noise, a quality of light, a tone, a habit, a nostalgia, a dream. And I'm going to stop there, and I do have a challenge. I belong to a poetry group here at Point Lobos, the docent group, and I think we should create a first line of poetry for our docent group on Point Lobos. But to begin, what we're going to do today, and how John Steinbeck ends this introduction, and he says, and perhaps that might be the way to write this book, to open the page and to let the stories crawl in by themselves. And so as we begin to embark on our exploration, we're just going to go down out there in the spray zone, in the high zone, mid zone, and the low zone, and just see what crawls out. So get your pamphlet, your Weston Beach Tide Pool pamphlet, and we're going to head out, and we are going to look again at the various zones in the tide pools, the splash zone, the high zone, mid zone, and the low zone. And I look forward to our exploration and just letting us see what we find today. One of the things I'd like you to notice is as I walk out to the low zone, we're still in the spray zone, beginning to be the high zone. This is really where there's a lot of photographs done by Edward Weston. And if you get down close to the rocks, there's so much beauty and shapes and lines, sediments, and actually it feels really good too. I've got knee-high boots on, so I can step in the water. But this would be your high zone tide pool. This is where I would take an elderly person. As I age, I hope my kids bring me out here and my grandkids, and I could sit here and look for sculpins, little teeny fish. I could look for hermit crabs moving around or scurrying in the water. But besides that, it's just beautiful rock formation with all sorts of sediment. And if you throw water on it, it glistens and shows its colors even more so. So here's some kelp. Here's another limpet. I got wet on my pants, which isn't unusual. And the other fun game is to figure out if the shells have hermit crabs in them or if they actually have little mollusks. And how you tell is you look here in the shell. This one is not empty. It has a hermit crab and it has a claw. So I know there's a hermit crab in a snail shell. I'm gonna try to look for a real snail, and what it has is an
No, your ball.
which is a door. But this is an actual snail, so you can see that. And it's turban because it goes round like this. And the first thing I want to talk about is those of you who are grandparents or parents and you have children that you want to bring to the tide pool. In the high zone, it's really the safest spot, and there's a less chance of slipping and falling. And here's some books that you can prepare kids with, or actually tell you the truth, even for me, sometimes they're the funnest. And the favorite one that I have is by Eric Carle and A House for Hermit Crab. And why I wanted to stop here and talk about it is we see, I want to press softly, and it's a bunch of pebbles. This is the high zone, so the water is gone and the sun is coming down bright. And this is a sea anemone underneath. When there's water on it, it has tentacles that come out, and the family that they're in is called cnidarians, or they are cnidarians, and they have stingers in their arms. And when they open up, they look like a flower. And what Eric Carle did is he, right in here, it actually looks like something that we call sea palm or pastelia, but it's his drawing of a sea anemone. And he says, in March, hermit crab met some sea anemones. They swayed gently back and forth in the water. How beautiful you are, said hermit crab. Would one of you be willing to come and live on my house? It is so plain, it needs you. I'll come, whispered a small sea anemone. Gently, hermit crab picked it up with his claw and put it on his shell. And the book goes on, and hermit crab actually decorates his shell with the anemone, a sea star, and here he's getting some coral and algae, of which I see a little bit right here that we could pick up. It's actually a plant, not an animal. And my main purpose was to stop here and show you that many times children's books in the library are really helpful to bring your children or grandchildren to the seashore and prepare them for what they might see. We're now in the mid-zone, and I must say it's not every day you can lay down on your belly in a tide pool where it's dry. But because it's low tide in about 30 minutes, that's why we're able to do it. I've stopped here for a certain reason, just like to talk about what's right here in plain view in the sunshine. And first of all, we've got a plant, two different kinds of coral and algae. And in the tide pools, it's hard to tell if something's a plant or an animal. But this is actually a plant, and it's got calcium carbonate in it, and that's how it feels hard. It's always good to just gently touch. And as I lay here, I can see a moving turban snail shell, so I can guess that it's a hermit crab. We've already seen one of those. You move something, you have to put it back where it was. And so I did put it back. It's a shelf. It's about 8 inches tall, 12 inches tall. And there's an opening about 5 inches long. And I can see with my eyes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's at least 10, probably a dozen, and they're actually about 12 inches back in there. But you might think then, why do they hide in there? Why 10 centimeters? What is their predator? The predator of a black abalone is typically a sea otter. And think about the skull of a sea otter. Is if you look at one, and some of you who may have watched the Mint Fan video would have seen the skull of a sea otter, and it's about 10 centimeters. And how long are their arms? Their arms on an otter are probably about 6, 7 inches long. And so even if they could get their arm in there, they can't swat out those black abalones. They're safe. About 18 inches in front of my finger. So I think it's called a purple short crab. Okay, we've moved ourselves down in the intersection of the mid zone to the low zone. And this is a pond where in the past years I've found octopus, but they're hard to see. But what we can see is many creatures that we haven't seen yet. And we're starting to see here the purple sea urchins. And they're in the group called the echinoderm, in with the sea stars, or what my age group used to call starfish. And there's these little cavities or holes, and you can see them here. They have like colonies, almost like condominiums. We're really lucky right now. We're sitting in the middle of a 3 o'clock sun. It's the lowest of the low tides. We're in a big tide pool here at Weston Beach, and we're mid to low zone. But what is really fancy and really exciting, and I've never really seen it that much, but thanks to a colleague docent, Karen Wagner, she pointed out she's been following this red sea urchin. As you can see, it's surrounded by a whole colony, a whole gathering, a whole group of purple sea urchins, with one red sea urchin sitting out in the bright sunshine. And that's pretty unusual for Weston Beach, for this habitat. Its spines are what appears to me to be about 2 inches long. And I'm going to put a ruler down in there so you can actually see how long they are. And I'd suggest that this would be a great creature for us to sketch. And what do we see? Okay, here comes and you can measure this in inches or centimeters. Okay, so we're here at Weston Beach, and we came from those stairs over there, and we walked out to the west, and we're in the mid zone, but we're headed more towards the low zone. And I'm going to walk through this channel, and we're going to get pictures of me walking here. So here's kelp up on the top of the rocks. Here's some limpets, and here's a chitin. Now, I'm not sure you can see this, but it has 8 plates, and it has various coralline algae on its plates. But again, do you see how I'm getting my nose into the rocks? And that's really important to find things. But here we go. We're headed to a really deep channel that has the flow of the water rushing, and it's out and around. From down low here, you can see the rock. I like to call it table rock. They're the California mussels, and they're all together. So we're gonna get up there and show you a really close look of those mussels. And inside them, in between them, sometimes you can find little teeny sea cucumbers. I'm gonna show you the pink on the side of the wall. The sun is coming in here, and there's pink coralline algae in the sunlight on the surface of the wall. And then there's also this laminaria that is waving in the sun. It's got the sunlight on it, so it's an orange yellow, and it's like a winged laminaria. It's got like 4, and it waves here in this surf channel. There we go. So you can see it just waving in the sun. And that is our bat star. And up here on the wall, wait a minute. the wave came up and I wanted to stand up so I wouldn't get totally wet. I'm going to go back down and just show you the coral and algae as the wave comes in. And then above the water level is, here's the side of the surge channel. And that's like a new codium coming out. Here's coral and algae on the side of the wall. And there's probably tube worms in here, the tip of my finger. You can see the little holes. And then you've got all this new, here's a coral and algae. Here's a limpet and a limpet. I'm standing up for a second. This is the biggest mussel I've seen right here. You see it? Let me show you. And I'd like to show you the biggest mussel I've seen. It's sticking out of the rock right there. It's in the sunshine and it's got a limpet on its outside, the white, and it's closed tight. And we're gonna go up now on this shelf over here where there's a whole, I would guess, 1,000 mussels, maybe more than, maybe thousands, but on this shelf. So we're gonna go look and see what we can see are on top of the mussel bed on top of the rock. Okay, we're on top of the table rock, and I told you that there would be owl limpets up here, and this is an owl limpet, and they graze the rock around its territory, and that's why there's no mussels there, and you don't see any coral and algae. So this owl limpet, if I had to guess, it's about 2 inches. I'm going to do it with centimeters, and it starts here at 1, and it's going all the way up to 6. I don't think you can read it, but definitely 6 centimeters long and about by 4. There's a keyhole limpet. And we're out here in probably the periphery of the low zone, and one of the really cool kelps that you get to touch, and it has one of the most memorable names, Dead Man's Fingers, and it's called Codium fragile. And it has, if you get really close here, it has something called an epiphyte, a red algae that just lives on the surface of this codium. Here's its holdfast, and a holdfast is how a marine algae holds on or really sucks on to the rock. And so even with the waves coming, it's a powerful attachment for this big, heavy kelp to hang on to this rock. So when the waves come blasting in here and try to knock it off, this holdfast right here, if you get up really close to it, is helping this plant hang on to the rocks. The marine algae do not have roots. They have holdfasts. Okay, we're gonna walk out under this shelf, and there's sea anemones down there. There's beautiful coral and algae. There's laminaria, which is a winged algae with a strip in the center. There's also, I'm pushing right here. This is an anemone where my finger is. It's soft. I'm not going to push hard because the creature's alive. But you can see it's got all sorts of decoration and little teeny pebbles and detritus that it's trying to prevent desiccation. So again, I'm going to take you slowly up so you can see where it actually is. It's really close. We're out here in the low zone. Let's see what's under this mussel shell. Oh, what's so cool is under the mussel shell, this purple sea urchin had covered itself with a mussel shell to protect itself. What a cool thing to do. And how does it hold the mussel shell on top of it? I'm replacing it. It has little teeny tube feet that can go out there and hold that shell on top of it. And as the waves break over it, it keeps that shell on top. If I were a purple sea urchin, I would love to have that mussel shell protecting me in the low zone time, because I don't think a black oyster catcher beak could peck at it and eat it. And I don't think a seagull could get it. So that's just really cool. Okay, so I'm looking around, and you can see in this bright, beautiful sunlight, you've got more purple sea urchins in these holes, these little caves of, I'm creeping closer so you can get a really good look. There's purple sea urchins in those holes, and the purple sea urchins have spines on them. And they also have something called an Aristotle's lantern on the bottom that can scrape these caved out parts of the rock. I hope you can see that deep inside there's sea urchins and it's sandstone. And again, their spines, and you can look it up. Aristotle's lantern has 5 parts, and they can drill down in this mudstone or sandstone out here at Weston Beach in the Carmelo Formation of the low tide zone. Okay, so here we are, we're out in the low zone again. The waves are a little low, and I've pulled up this kelp that is just so pretty, blooming out here in the sunlight, waving in the waves. And it's called Turkish towel because it has these little teeny protrusions, I guess you could call it. And it would be like something you can imagine you would wash yourself with to get yourself clean. And it's called Turkish towel. And it's a marine algae. And it lives out here at Weston Beach. And it's just looking beautiful. Okay, we're now here on the southern edge of Weston Beach. And I like to call this cove here in front, I like to call it Seeley's Cove, because a friend of mine named Seeley, a photographer, who encouraged us docents to be artistic and to just go for it. In the beginning, I talked to you about sense of place, and we reviewed the poets, the writers, poet being Robinson Jeffers, the writer being John Steinbeck, and how to create your own art in a place. And this was a painting I did, I believe it was about 3-4 years ago. And I called it at Seeley's Cove. And I'm standing pretty much, I was just slightly up slope from here. And this is the beauty of our Point Lobos State Natural Reserve, is that you can create poetry. You can write text that you include aspects of Point Lobos in it, as John Steinbeck did with tide pools. You can actually paint pictures. Take photographs, Ansel Adams, Edward Weston. But anyway, it has been a great pleasure to take you on a tour in the tide pool.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you, Mary. That was phenomenal. I can watch that over and over and over again. So thank you so much. And of course, thank you to Fred Brown for that amazing production. I think we can all agree. So now let's open it up to some questions. If you would like to put them in the chat, feel free. And if you would like to speak, you will be highlighted. So everyone feel free to unmute yourself, and we already have a question. This is great. Gwen says, when is the best time of year to explore tide pools? I have been to tide pools in the fall and didn't see too much.
There is a section of the calendar year where the tides aren't as low as the rest of the year. And I think it is probably like July, August, and September. So, but any time is a good time. And I know at the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve and with their group, they always say any tide that's lower than 1.0 is a good time to explore the low tide pools. And make yourself familiar with the high zone and the mid zone, even if the low zone isn't open and available to you.
Yeah, it's a great time when the Point Lobos docents are out there, because if you find a docent in the tide pools, you will see so many things that you wouldn't otherwise notice. So I found that myself.
So Mary,
thank you, Gwen.
Yes.
I was in your docent class 31 with Fred.
Great, Karen. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm in Ohio now. But Yeah, I would like you to talk about the health of the marine life. Have you noticed any changes with the change in climate?
I'm actually going to bounce that to my colleague, Christine.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Karen, we are seeing some changes, but really we're looking at the big picture now. And with climate change, we are seeing changes with shellfish in generally, not specifically Point Lobos, but around the coast. And because of the a large CO2 amount in the atmosphere that's been building up over the years, because of the imbalance of the CO2 cycle, we're getting a lot more absorption of CO2 into the oceans. They're a great absorber, but the downside is that it affects the ability of those shellfish to build shells. There's not as many carbonate ions, and I won't go into the chemistry because I don't really know it fully, but it is affecting those shellfish. And the Dungeness crab population up north is down because of that, and we're concerned about the population of our shellfish up and down the coast. So in the planet is warming, so the oceans are warming. They're sucking that warmth in, and that's going to affect where you're going to find different critters in the tide pools, because often they'll go for cooler water.
Yeah, I've heard news about the sea otters and the abalone, you know, that they were having struggles at one point. And then I think I heard something about the orange stars, maybe, or one of the stars. So
Yeah,
that was a few years ago.
yeah, the sea star population has definitely been affected. And because otters are a keystone species, they're affected by the change in population of shellfish, and they will be over the years.
One of the things I could add is that the Point Lobos Foundation will present a topic on climate change in relation to Point Lobos later in the year, I believe. And hopefully there'll be some comment to follow up your question specifically in the tide pools.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Great question. Nice to see you.
Nice to be back.
Yes, isn't it nice? It's so nice. You can be far and yet here. So thank you so much. We had a couple questions, and it's a question I have. You know, I always wonder, how do you avoid stepping on creatures in the tide pools when they're so well camouflaged? How do you do that, and how can you be careful? Because I know when I see that, you know, when I see you something, you know, so well camouflaged, I thought, oh my gosh, what if I had stepped on it?
One of the things I think is to walk slowly and carefully, just for your own safety, and that also would help with the safety of the creatures, because you can direct where you put your feet so that you're not directly on a live creature. The other perspective I have is that when I've been with mentor trainers such as Steve Webster or John Pierce or Dr. Watanabe, they'll remind me that the boulders in high tide or in heavy surf are always coming in, and many of the creatures in the tide pools are designed such that they can withstand rock pressures, that they're not, or human stepping on. But try definitely not to step on an animal if you can avoid it, but walk around them and be gentle. And I just know just as those of you, many of you are of my age, we didn't wear seatbelts when we were children. And we used to go to the tide pools and use sticks and poke into or I did when my mom took me, but we didn't know better. I don't know why. We used to collect the Peisaster ochre stars, put them on our front porch in Santa Cruz, but we'd never you wouldn't do that now. We've learned that all of our creatures exist in such a way that they don't live. We're not going to have these populations as we've had before, and we have to treasure them and keep them living intact in their environment as long as we can. And it's especially great to go to a place such as Weston Beach at the reserve where all the creatures are protected. And the other part I think about that is even just collecting shells. I hope I didn't get off the question. It was stepping on the creatures and protecting them, but this is kind of in line. I want to get it out. The collecting of the shells, they become incubators for new life. And so you don't want to pick them up and take them and remove them from the tide pool, or else you decrease the ability of the larva to land and to safely reproduce. But if you walk slowly and watch where you're walking and avoid live creatures, I think that's how you protect preventing damage. And then also they also are designed in such a way that they can withstand pressure. And some, like, for example, the purple sea urchins are many times down embedded into little cavities so that your foot wouldn't touch them anyway.
Thank you, Mary. Are there any places where you can tide pool that are handicap accessible, safe for someone with a walker, wheelchair? Is there any advice you have for someone who has limited mobility?
I was going to suggest the aquarium. I don't think there's really a place for wheelchair access to a tide pool. Possibly there is, I'm just not aware of it, where anywhere where there's a sandy beach and then maybe there's rocks, you could get to it. But I just think it'd be very difficult. I think a less abled person in a wheelchair, if you can get close to the tide pools and then stand up, you might be able with assistance to stay and sit on a rock that surrounds a larger tide pool and just sit there quietly. And you could actually do that if you can get, if you're less abled, you can get your wheelchair pretty close to the tide pools and you have people that can help you go and sit in the high zone. That would sure be a way I'd try to do it. Even as I age, and if I didn't want to break my hip, I would go sit at the tide pools at the high zone and look into them and just not move around a lot. You can enjoy the tide pools without scurrying around or going to the low zone.
Right, Mary, I think in the video, there is a point where you sit on a flat rock and you mentioned that this would be a place that you would sit and observe if you couldn't go out into the tide pools. And it is very slippery. It's definitely, you need to use caution when out among the lower zones. And we have a question, what is the difference between kelp and algae?
Kelps are forms of marine algae. They're a group, they're large, typically the brown algae, and they're larger. And it's just a word that I grew up talking about because I did grow up going to Santa Cruz and body surfing at Seabright. And we just always said that there's kelp out there or algae. We kind of use them flip them back and forth, but I've since learned that there's green algae, red algae, and brown algae, and many of the browns are considered kelp. So all kelp are algae, marine algae.
Wonderful. Let's see, do we have any other questions that I missed? Actually, I have a question that I'll go ahead and launch out there is how, now that the reserve is reopening and the docents are getting back out there, are there plans to do public tide pooling looking in the near future, or?
I'm not active. I don't think Bob Andonian is on this. If you're there, Bob, please speak up, but I don't think he is. But he's in charge of our docent public walks. And I think that there have been public walks posted now, we're starting to see them. And I can, as we are here, I can certainly say that by early June, I'll do 2. How's that? Yes, docents are starting to reconsider coming back and doing public walks. The docents can give public walks now, and we're told how to do it, limiting numbers, but we are encouraged to sign up and get out there and do public walks.
Yeah, the tide pools are very spread out.
Did I answer that well enough? I don't know if Christine would like to add anything to that.
Well,
Or-
I think it's coming. I know we are, as Mary said, we're doing public walks, and tide pool interpretation out there is next. Most of the docents are, as far as I know, are vaccinated. So it's a much more safe atmosphere out there. Peter Fletcher, I think, I'm not sure if he's here. Oh, he is here. Jack Arnold and others have done some wonderful tide pool interpretation out there. So I'm hoping to see that come back, but there is a task force which will decide which, what can come next, I believe, and Betty may be able to enlighten us a little more about that.
She may have
Docents are definitely free to sign up to do public walks in the tide pools. We just limit the numbers and ask that people wear masks for right now when you're close together. And so I think they're like Mary, she'll be signing up hopefully soon to be doing a walk or tour, shall we say, in the tide pool. So I think as we just all emerge and start doing it, I'm sure people like Jack and Peter and Karen will be providing those kinds of services for our docents, for our visitors.
Thank you, Betty.
What is the best way to determine low tide, or what are the best tides? Is it an hour before low tide? Is it a few minutes before low tide? What should someone be looking for when they're trying to explore the tide pools as far as tides, if you're not really adept at that?
When I look for an hour before the lowest tide of the day. There's 4 tides each day, 2 highs and 2 lows, and one of the lows is lower and one of the highs is higher. So I pick for the lowest low tide of the day that's during daylight hours, and in particular with Point Lobos when it's open. I have a favorite spot, and I'd encourage you who are fortunate enough to live near the ocean, if you live near here, if you can't go to Point Lobos, what's your favorite spot to go to if the low tide's at 5:30 during the summer when there's daylight hours, or in the winter when it might be 7 and the reserve doesn't open until 8? Where are you going to go? But an hour before the low tide, and then generally you can still be out there. In some of the tides we're getting right now, they're very low, and you can stay out an hour to tide pool after the low tide. And
Are there any
go
Point
ahead.
Lobos beaches that are, besides China Cove, off limits to exploration? I don't think so, are there?
Did you say, are there any
Any
other
Point
would you-
Lobos beaches aside from China Cove? I don't believe so, because Hidden Beach is open. Gibson Beach is open. Aside from, obviously keeping your distance from the marine mammals. But that's in the other, are there any other areas that you go down to explore the water, or is it pretty much mainly there?
There's one more, and you can go to Moss Cove. You have to be aware of the marine mammals when you're down there, and if you're try to avoid them if you can. Well, you shouldn't go into the tide pools if you can't avoid the marine mammals if they're there. But you can go into Moss Cove, and they have beautiful tide pools. And the other second thought is the pit at very low tides. There's a cave there that has vertical walls that you can go look at.
Tracy, can I add something here?
Absolutely.
So we had a question early on about how to walk in the tide pools and keep the critters safe. And Jack Arnold and the Youth Programs Committee has been working on a series of videos, and one of them was on tide pool etiquette. These are designed for kids, but they're really good for adults too. And there's some tide pool safety videos there also. But one of his best pieces of advice is to just sit and watch. Try not to disturb the animals, and remember that it's their home. So I love that when we talk about the tide pools, that it's the habitat for these critters there. So I loved your question about how to avoid walking on them. But just sometimes all you have to do is sit and watch, like Mary did in the video, and you're going to see a lot of action there. And then there's some safety concerns. If you're new to tide pools, just make sure you're always watching those waves because they can come in pretty fast. Mary was way out there. But if you're new, I would suggest, I'm a cautious person, staying in the splash zone or the high zone up on the beach. You can see a lot there without getting in the water, and always wear good walking shoes, sturdy shoes, or boots are even better. A pole sometimes helps. And a reminder that we don't collect. There's been a large increase in collecting lately of shells and rocks and critters out there. And I think a lot of people just want to get out in the tide pools, and you can understand that, but no collecting is allowed. We want to keep that habitat safe. So that's just my little point there, to keep the critters safe in that tide pool, in those tide pools.
That's a great reminder. Yeah, I appreciate that. Are there any other questions? Anyone? I'm keeping my eye on the chat box, but please feel free to ask any questions. And if there's anything that has come to mind, Mary, Christine, that you want to add, feel free. Mary, do you want to talk a little bit? Because that's one thing that, we haven't talked about is your, something I think is wonderful is the sketches of tide pooling. I'd love for you just to tell everyone here today how you inspire that and how you do it, because I thought that was a wonderful thing that we weren't really able to incorporate in this particular event, but I think it's a wonderful thing for the future too.
Thank you, Tracy. I loved how Fred picked out the ending of the video where he used the painting that I'd done at Seeley's Cove, and he was able to wrap up the video with that. And Seeley was really inspirational when I first became a docent. Some of the rest of it, she encouraged us to take photographs. She created and asked for there to be share your photos on our docent website. And it just helps us. We also had one of our docents, Kathy Ryan, actually, it wasn't Kathy Ryan who started it, but was doing it before the pandemic, where we had an opportunity to show our art, our photographs, our paintings, our sketches. I know that during the pandemic, Don McDougall worked, and some of the docents had been involved together in a sketch class with Kathy Ryan leading it. And so we got to show some of our art. So I think in answering your question, Tracy, it's, if people ask you to go sketching, or if people ask you to go painting, or to go write poetry, or to share your poetry with them, go on a poetry walk, pick your favorite poems and walk through Point Lobos. I know I've done that with Stella Rebeau. I think she may or may not have been here today. Just make those artistic moments. The other, Cynthia Wagner-Wick, has written a pamphlet about art in Point Lobos from the masters, but all the masters started as a beginner, started with just that thought, that human thought of, and it led from just sitting and looking and observing in the tide pools to, it gives you an excuse to sit and watch and listen and hear, watch the light change. I know one of the things I wanted to get out, and I haven't said yet, if I could, it's somewhat artistic, but I know I was inspired by my mother to do tide pools. I tried to get my brothers and sisters to come today. They're not here today for this. I am going to send them a copy of it. But one brother wrote back and said how much he remembers and was inspired by our mother taking us to the tide pools. And I now have 2 grandsons, and I have been able to tide pool with one of them. And I just encourage you again to take your children out. It's a lot easier to start doing art if you're doing it with children, because of course the children don't have this voice in their heads that says, I'm not artistic, I can't do art. Well, I had that in my head also at different times, but I've been encouraged now to create, and as you get older and you're not raising children, or you have a little more time. So take time to sit down. I think even my co-moderator here, Christine, has started to do some of her own sketches, and she used to think that she couldn't. I don't know. Would you like to comment on that, Christine, your evolution?
I'm way down on the evolutionary ladder, but it's fun. It is fun.
And Point Lobos is so beautiful. I've often thought with photographs that people compliment me on it. I'm just taking a picture of a beautiful thing, you know, with our new digital cameras. But and then when you do art, I'm wrapping up, I promise. When you do art, you're not too pleased with it and you have lots of voices. Well, it's no good. But I've been so impressed. I do use Instagram and I'll post it, and I have friends on Instagram, but I can tell if the art's good, and sometimes they'll like something I didn't like, but I get good positive feedback. So I'd encourage people, if you've thought about it, even if you just start with a little watercolor kit that costs $2 and a piece of any kind of paper, you can go out and just sketch things. You can take a pencil and a piece of paper and sketch. And I've been very impressed and pleased with the feedback I get from friends if you just use it for stationery to write a friend.
Right. Mary, I can't let you go yet. We have a couple of questions. um, can you tell Tom where the Great Tide Pool is?
Good question.
The fan of Ed Ricketts.
There's actually a sign now that's up, but if you start at Point Pinos at the end of, by the Pacific Grove Golf Course, by Crespi Pond, and go around the corner to the south, before you hit Asilomar Beach, about halfway between the lighthouse and Asilomar Beach, is the Great Tide Pool. And if you walk along the shore on the path near the ocean, there is a sign that will say the Great Tide Pool now, but it is a half moon or a half moon shape of a tide pool, or U shape, I guess, more like a horseshoe shaped tide pool. I have heard Dr. Pierce say when he's out there, we're not sure exactly which one of these horseshoe ponds is, quote, the Great Tide Pool, but there is a sign now, so we might as well call that one the Great Tide Pool. If Vicki Pierce is still here, she may want to comment on it, because she may,
I'm not sure if Vicki is still here. She was, but I don't see
muted.
her. Oh, there she is. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, she is.
But
I'm here. I remember sometimes being able to walk along rocks at the outside of the tide pool. So there really is a bit of an enclosure to it. But most of the time it looks like it's just open to the sea.
Great.
thank you, Vicki.
And Mary, you were sticking a camera under the water. What is that?
I can actually show it to you. Well, I was using Fred's camera, but his is very similar to what I have here. And mine is, there it is. Mine's an Olympus, and they're waterproof cameras that can go underwater. My husband bought me a float because it's a little bit of an investment and you want to be able to find it if you drop it, or you don't want it to go deep into the tide pool. But there are various manufacturers of waterproof cameras that you can bring underwater and it doesn't hurt them. Does that answer? I think.
Yeah, it really does. So then what Fred did was take the photos that you took under there.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that is fascinating.
You can take still photos and videos. So once I was in what I call Seeley's Cove. Ed Clifton calls it Nightmare Cove. But and I actually videotaped a little small 1-inch black abalone moving on a rock. And that was really fun. Also, you can get pictures of kelp waving in the surge channels. And that's beautiful. It's very soothing. You can hear the rush noises of the water. In some parts of the movie, you could hear the sound of the surging water also. That's a good question. I like that question. And I bought a waterproof camera because I dropped, it wasn't my cell phone I dropped, but I had a little small digital camera at the time. And I was taking pictures and I dropped it into a tide pool. It was only 2 inches deep. Oh, and I know what inspired me also. I was out in my kayak in Carmel Bay with a kayak group, and the Riso dolphins came underneath us. They were like a marching band from, we were facing west, and they came underneath us and came close to our kayaks within 10 feet and went behind us. And I noticed that one of the kayakers was able to take a video of that by just putting his camera, just reach his arm out and put his camera under the water. And then he could show you the pictures of the Riso dolphins with their sounds, their high frequency sounds. And that was like, I want one of those cameras. And I had the good fortune of being able to then have an Olympus camera.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Don, yeah, thank you for sharing. GoPro 9 has a good underwater case. So yeah, I think all of us now want to take photos so that we can enjoy them under. I know I do. I just want to rerun this all the time. I want to let everyone know if there is there any other questions, because as we wrap up, I just want to let everyone know, one, you will all receive a recording. So, you know, if you missed anything, you can go back and take a look at it. If you want to share it with anyone who wasn't able to be here or that you just know would love it, please feel free to share it. And also, I just appreciate the support you give the foundation so that we can fund projects and be able to fund the docent program that provides this amazing interpretation and this opportunity for all the visitors to really understand the reserve in a different way than they would just on their own. So we greatly appreciate our docent organization and all the things you do, Mary and Christine, and all the docents who are on right now. And thank you so much. Really looking forward to next month. We're going to continue Marine Mammals Part 2 for those of you who joined us for Marine Mammals 1. We're not done with the conversation, so Riso's dolphins more. Excellent segue in.
And thank you to the foundation for all the support you give to our docent corps. We appreciate your work.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you, Tracy.
absolutely our honor. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day and enjoy this beautiful weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.